Good morning, we're team number 6 and today we're going to present our timeline.
First, we have some key vocabulary. The first keyword is the Doppler effect. It is when an object that emits the sonorous wave is closer to an observer. The wave compresses as they approximate. This happens, for example, when a vehicle with a siren like an ambulance comes near you.
Taxonomy, science that deals with the principles, methods, and purposes of classification for systematized ordering of animals and vegetables. Natural selection is the process through which populations of living organisms adapt and change. Also, is one of the basic mechanisms of evolution, along with mutation, migration, and genetic drift.
Evolution is a natural process that contributes to the change of the genetic characteristics of the species and leads them to adapt to the environmental conditions or to become extinct when these don't possess enough variation to respond to drastic changes.
RNA translation involves decoding a message, RNA, from mRNA and using that information to build a polypeptide or a chain of amino acids.
Taxonomists are biologists that cultivate the discipline of taxonomy and are specialists in morphology, organic functions, habitats, geographic distribution, and other aspects.
The RNA world theory. It suggests that life on Earth began with a simple RNA molecule that could copy itself without the help of any other molecule.
Organism, a form of life, living being, a plant, animal, fungi, monera, or protista.
Okay, so now we have the evolution, history, and evidences of evolution. In the origin of species, Darwin referred to three aspects of evolution. These are adaptation, transformation, and diversification of a species. And to explain this, he presented different types of theories about the evolution process. At first, we have that devolution does exist. 2, all live and extinct species come from common ancestors. 3, the process of evolution occurs guided by natural selection. 4, as a result of the process of natural selection, species tend to adapt to a changing environment. 5, the specialization of a species leads them to change and separate from their original group. 6, the process of evolution occurs in slow and gradual manner as generations go by. And 7, the process of breeding animals and cultivating plants has great similarities with what happens with evolution. Another way to demonstrate evolution is the existence of fossils, which are the remaining bones of the living beings' ancestors that were buried and with time solidified, which allowed them to preserve. These were discovered back in 1878 in the depths of a coal mine in Belgium.
Along the last centuries, the size of the universe grew conceptually in the minds of astrophysicists and astronomers. However, despite the increase of the size in the universe stayed static. It appeared to be fixed, changeless, beyond mere conceptual growth. That's why some scientists try to propose theories about the origin of the universe. The first theory is from 1922 and it was proposed by Alexander Friedmann, and it's called the oscillating or pulsating universe. The next proposed theory was in 1927 by Georges Lemaître, and it's called the Big Bang theory. The next theory is the stationary state theory, and it was suggested by Fred Hoyle Herman, Bondi, and Thomas Gold in 1948. The last proposed theory was by Alan Guth in 1981. Thus, only two complementary theories remain firm currently, and are supported by the community of astronomers and astrophysicists. The Big Bang, supported by strong evidence, and the inflammatory model, which is more of a necessary proposal to explain the aspects of the first seconds following the explosion.
The most important theories and experiments that explain how life originated by chemical evolution are: in 1809, Lamarck tried to explain how life originated, basing his theory on the spontaneous generation. He thought that from microbes, animals and plants were created. Then, in 1850, Louis Pasteur demonstrated that spontaneous generation was wrong. He made an experiment where he put a sterilized soup into a flask. One had external contact and the other one not. After a year, he saw that in the flask with no external contact, the soup didn't decompose, while the other one did. This experiment showed that microbes didn't appear from nowhere. Then, in 1923, Alexander Oparin, in his book The Origin of Life, proposed that life originated in a primary atmosphere with no oxygen. This initial atmosphere was strongly suppressed due to the lack of oxygen. He said that the first living beings were unicellular and anaerobic, meaning that they can survive with no oxygen. These microbes started as inorganic matter that later was transformed by a chemical evolutive process into organic molecules. Those resultant molecules started to become more complex until it was created the first cell. This theory was called the heterotroph hypothesis. And finally, in 1953, Harold Urey and Stanley Miller created a model of the primitive atmosphere of Earth. They based this model on Oparin's idea. Harold and Stanley made a system of tubes and flasks isolated from the exterior. Miller introduced on the flask water, methane gas, ammonia, and molecular hydrogen. This represented the seas of Earth. Then, that pool of water was heated, creating a cloud that passed through a contact of an electrical spark which stimulated the energy of lightning and created a simulation of the atmosphere. Finally, the vapor was condensed. After some days, Miller studied the condensed liquid and found out that the compounds he put transformed into complex organic molecules in abiotic conditions.
On 1960, Alexander Rich, Carl Woese, Leslie Orgel, and Francis Crick independently proposed the existence of a first biological world based on RNA molecules. This means that they proposed existence of the first biological world based on RNA molecules previous to the one that we presently know as based on DNA, RNA, and proteins. RNA is a simple molecule composed of a single nuclear chain in which limitation laid as height, while DNA with a double helix is more stable. Then, on 1980, the evidence in favor of the world of RNA arrived in this decade. In this evidence, we show that one small molecule of RNA were discovered in living beings. But on 1985, a posterior hypothesis came to a more complex world of RNA, DNA, and proteins, which means that RNA was too unstable, so it allowed mutation. But as long as mutation kept going, everything would getting better or having some changes. But as DNA is more stable, it makes more sense that we get evolving and evolving.
Evolution theories. Jean-Baptiste proposed the spontaneous generation theory. He thought that an organism could be able to change physically over time in order to inherit its changes to its descendants. It occurred in 1802. In 1838, Charles Darwin had the idea of natural selection. It consists that if an organism did not adapt to the circumstances, it will most likely die. In 1859, Darwin published The Origin of the Species. where he revealed his ideas of the world and the numerous evidence he used.
As we already stated, taxonomy is the science that deals with principles, methods, and purpose of classification. So its purpose, obviously, is to order, classify from inclusive groups to peculiarities of their homologous characters. The first system of classification was by Aristotle. He ordered them by two large groups, Enymos and Anymos. During the Middle Ages, classification of plants and animals had a practical or a utilitarian bias. During the 18th century, naturalists made Latin and Greek their official tongue of the classification of the species. In 1735, Linnaeus determined that species should be ordered in hierarchical or classification taxonomic categories such as kingdom, class, gender, and species. During the 19th century, two big things happened. First, Lamarck adjusted the classification to vertebrates and invertebrates, which means the absence or presence of a spinal column. The other event that happened in the 19th century was that there were only two kingdoms, the animal, which are multicellular organisms with sexual reproduction, and the plant kingdom, that are multicellular organisms with sexual and asexual reproduction. In 1866, Haeckel created the third kingdom, and he called it Protista, which are unicellular microbes with sexual and asexual reproduction. In 1925, Eduardo Chanton divided the cells based on the absence or presence of a nucleus. Cells with nucleus he called eukaryotes, and without, prokaryotes. In 1939, Herbert Copeland separated the bacteria from the Protista and created the fourth kingdom, which he called Monera, that are living beings with a lack of a nucleus in their cells and with asexual reproduction. In 1959, Robert Whittaker found under the microscope a diverse subgroup, which he called fungi, that are unicellular, pluricellular, and multicellular species, making it the fifth kingdom. In 1977, Carl Woese, which he studied genes, found that there is a superior classification of a kingdom, which is the domain, and the domain is three: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Even nowadays, in the present, there is still discussion of the three domains, the five kingdoms, and even the existence of a sixth kingdom.
Conclusion. As we can see, the evolution of the universe is more complex than it seems. It took a lot of years, theories, evidence, and people to fully determine all the real causes of each phenomenon, and to realize that almost everything is linked, and has a reason and purpose of being the way it is. That is why this topic is really important in the sciences. Thank you for your attention.